Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today will be more of a story time video of how I broke into private equity and investment banking. Now I say this is a story time because honestly the way that I got in is pretty untraditional. I've never really gone through on-cycle or on-campus recruiting, and I've only worked at smaller boutique firms, you can say, that hired in a pretty unstructured manner. If that's something that's interesting to you, then stay tuned for the rest of the video. Okay, so let's go back more to the beginning. I grew up as a very happy-go-lucky type of kid that never thought too much about careers and jobs, right? I was definitely not one of these 6-year-olds that knew I wanted to be a doctor or engineer when I get older.
When I will grow up, I will be army. Strong army, wow, great!
And even up until my last year of high school, this is when we have to pick university majors, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. My parents are in software engineering, so it was kind of implied that I might go towards that direction, but I really just couldn't see myself coding for the rest of my life. And the next thing that came to me was just thinking about something that I enjoyed. And when we first came to Canada, we lived in this apartment building that had a bunch of Indian and Pakistani kids. So I used to hang around with them, and after school we played a lot of cricket and baseball. And at the same time we also watched a lot of baseball on TV, right? This is when I really started enjoying the sport, and even up until high school, I played a lot of fantasy baseball with my friends. And I kind of drew this connection that playing fantasy baseball is very similar to running a stock portfolio, in a sense that individual players are, individual stocks that you pick, and your team is your portfolio, and you have to outperform the other teams, right? Because of this whim, I decided to pursue finance. And keep in mind at this time, I always thought I'd be in software engineering, so I never really taken a single course in accounting, finance. I've always taken computer sciences or just physical sciences. So essentially, I went into university blind, not knowing anything about the careers in this field or even any subjects of this field. Now, first year comes around, I got into this weird business program, you could say, in Canada, where first 2 years you could take any major that you want, and the last 2 years is the actual business school, right? Since I didn't have any background in finance or economics, I decided to major in economics first year. And after one semester, I realized I didn't like economics at all. So I ended up switching to a bunch of programs and eventually landed in math. At the same time in first year, now you have these like hyper-focused, keener kids that knew exactly what they want for their career, right? Kids that wanted to be doctors are now looking for lab volunteering experience. The guys that are in software are doing hackathons, and the guys that are in finance specifically are networking with some of the upper years, so then when they come back to recruit, you have a good chance of landing a good job, right? And honestly, in first year, I carried the exact same attitude that I had from high school, where I just never cared about careers or jobs. First year for me, it was just like messing around a lot with my friends and did a lot of dumb stuff, and I cruised by without making any advancements to my career. The turning point for me really came in second year at the end of the first semester. I was studying with a friend of mine at the time who I met in first year residence. And he was a guy who was hyper focused to trying to break into investment banking. This is when I really learned about the industry, right? The different pathways to go from investment banking to private equity, hedge fund. And for the first time, I was really told about all this stuff. So at this time, he was convinced that cold emailing was the way to go to land an internship as a second year, which honestly made sense at the time because it was pretty tough to recruit otherwise. So he had a list of contacts that he pulled from the school alumni directory, and he didn't really care if I applied to the same firms that he did, so he sent me the same list. But at the same time, he also didn't really tell me too much about cold emailing and how to do it, so I was honestly left on my own to figure out that part of it. For some reason, it didn't occur to me that I should be looking up how to cold email first, and I just, at the time, went with my intuition and just blasted out a bunch of emails without looking up anything. And I was just making mistakes left and right? The number one biggest mistakes that I made was probably focusing only on directors and VPs. I didn't really bother emailing associates and analysts because I thought they wouldn't have pulled. And my second largest mistake was how bad the body of my email was. Normally, people recommend you to ask them about their experiences over phone or coffee chat, or ask about their firm, and then eventually sneak that line in the end where like, are you guys looking for interns, right? For me, I thought a cold email was literally you asking for a job. So my email was just super blunt at the time, where I asked, hey, I'm a second year student, I'm looking for an internship, let me know if you have anything. And the third biggest mistake was just how bad my resume was at this time, right? Since I had no prior experiences, my number one experience was I was a contributor to the school newspaper. And my second experience was I was a lifeguard at a swimming pool in high school. So I blasted out at this time probably about 250 to 300 emails to all the firms in Toronto. And that's how my first round of cold emailing went. I'm actually surprised because people actually got back to me with all these mistakes that I made. But all these people who got back to me are rejections, right? Out of the 250, I think about 3 or 4 got back to me, and all of them were saying, sorry, we're not hiring, or maybe come back next year, right? So to nobody's surprise, I think I just got no results out of the first blast. Now, second semester comes around, I still had nothing lined up for the summer, and I didn't want to sit at home doing nothing. Realistically, first semester was when people actually do the hiring, because now in April, at the end of the second semester, people either would have hired already or they just don't want an intern, right? But I didn't know any better, so I decided to do another blast. This time it was a lot smaller, probably just to about 40 to 50 firms. And here's probably the biggest shocker of the story, is that out of the 40 emails that I sent out, one firm got back to me asking me to come in for an interview. Now, in hindsight, emailing April with all my terrible resumes and my terrible email, I'm surprised that people just didn't even blacklist me. And the VP got back to me. He said, hey, I saw your resume come in, so can you come in next week for an interview, right? And at this time when I got this message to come in, it was my first ever investment banking interview, right? So at this point, I was not prepared at all because I just never had a reason to prepare. For the first time, I'm looking up how to do a DCF, how to do a stock pitch, how to run comps. Definitely not prepared to do an interview, right? A week later, I was on the train to downtown, just memorizing the WAC formulas, how to do a DCF. And the moment I stepped into the office, it was downtown, 30th floor. It's the first time I've actually walked into a downtown office, and it was just super intimidating. And when the receptionist sat me down in the office, I was just like nervous in my head, trying to remember the WAC formula, right? I was probably sat down for 5 to 10 minutes, and then my VP walked in, the guy who responded to my email. And the best way to describe this guy was, he was like a bro. He was this 30-year-old Russian dude who's like super jacked and fit, right? I thought he was a very chill dude, the first impression of him. At this time, I was expecting to go on like a full-on investment banking interview, right? He would ask me to go through my resume first, and then he would just blast me with questions like, give me a stock recommendation, and how would you analyze a stock, or do a DCF. But for the 30 minutes that I was there, he went through my resume, and we essentially had a casual conversation about my resume. He asked me things like, you were a swimming instructor, like what sort of swimming did you coach? And you like baseball, what's your favorite team? And that's how the first interview went. Like at the time, I thought it was pretty good because we just had a free-flowing conversation. But in hindsight, I would think it's just extremely weird. He never asked me a single thing about investment banking, right? I went downstairs, I was just dead tired at this time, so I went to the Starbucks to get a coffee. I was sat down. This is probably, 30 minutes after my interview. I get an email in my mailbox. I liked your interviews, so come in next week to start your internship. And I don't really realize how important this was to set up the rest of my career, because I guess technically this was me becoming an investment banker for the first time, right? Everything just somehow fell in place. And obviously, the first day I started work, the thing that I wanted to ask him is, why did he end up hiring me, right? And I think the moral of this story here is I was in the right place at the right time. So the morning of, when my cold email went into his mailbox, they had a partners meeting. And in that partners meeting, they were discussing that they should be hiring an intern for the summer. It just happened in the afternoon. I was the first cold email to go into their mailbox, and that's why he gave me the chance to interview. And this was more of a startup firm at this time, in a sense that they began 5 months before I applied in April, right? So they just started the firm in late December, January-ish. So they actually didn't really have a chance to look at interns in the first wave, and nobody really applied. So I probably was one of few people who were actually trying to land an internship in April. And I asked him why he did not ask me anything related to investment banking during the interview. And he told me that things will be taught to you on the job. And, for the most part, they don't expect people to know much coming into it. And honestly, from working for the first month or two, I really truly believe in that, because at the end of the day, a lot of things in school really can't teach you how to make assumptions about deals and how to modify your DCF in certain ways to match certain deals, right? A lot of these things are very situational and it's tough to learn it in school. I learned everything about investment banking essentially in the first 2 months of working there. The firm itself is a diversified investment bank that took on a bunch of random smaller deals. We were doing pretty much everything at the time, a little bit of M&A work, a little bit of IPO of smaller firms, issuing some debt, and the industry itself was also kind of diverse. We did some metals and mining, some refineries, some consumer bakeries. I actually had a director who was focused on funding films. His office was right behind my desk at the time, and I used to hear him have conversations like a cowboy hip-hop movie in the South would never make any money, right? So those were definitely interesting times in the sense that, you know, I had exposure to a lot of different industries. And the firm itself at the time had one analyst, no associates, and a couple directors. So sometimes when the full-time analyst was swamped, I was the only other guy there. So I had to be staffed on, you know, some of the deals just on my own. I had to essentially do the whole package, you know, do the underwriting, do the modeling. And it was definitely one of the better learning experiences because I just had to do so much. It was the end of the internship, second year, and I did well enough so that they asked me to come back in third year. So now I go back to school third year. I was a math major pretty much for most of the first 2 years. And I got this idea in my head that I want to pursue a master's degree in quant trading because of my math background. So at this point, I didn't end up going to business school. And in my head, my thought process was I want to finish my math degree and go take a master's at Columbia, MIT to do one of their master's program in financial engineering and pursue quant, right? But I also at the same time didn't expect how much I would, you know, enjoy working. So I was kind of stuck at this time. So either I continue with banking or I pursue a quant degree beyond undergrad. Now, third year, since they asked me to come back and I really wanted to pursue quant, I didn't think about even recruiting for other firms. So third year, I essentially took their offer and I went back again for a second internship while I was continuing my math degree. At the end of that summer, they offered me to come back for full-time. Fourth year comes and it's obviously the big decision whether I wanted to do a master's or I want to start working as a banker full-time. And the thought process at this time was the master's can wait and I should at least try working first before starting the master's. And honestly, at this point in my life, I just started working. I started making a little bit of decent money because now I'm doing it full-time. I moved out, lived on my own. I think it's just the biggest change in lifestyle-wise. It just made too much sense for me to continue working and just not go back to school. And so I decided to pretty much at this point not look back at going back to school. A few months into my full-time work with the first firm, I decided to pursue other opportunities, mostly because this firm itself was a little bit of a startup at the time still, and I was looking at a firm who would be a little bit more established. So because I had my first investment banking job experience, I've been getting a lot better, easier offers now, right? I think by the time I had my first internship and my full-time experience, it just made everything a lot easier. I was definitely recruiting with some of the more established boutiques as well as some of the bigger banks here in Canada, right? And what came to me at the time was a job offer at a real estate focused investment bank. Now, a quick story about this firm was when I first interviewed, I sat down with the first round interviewer, which was the operations director, I guess, for the firm. And the first thing she asked me is like, did you go to this high school? I was like, oh yeah, I did. And apparently we went to the same high school. So again, the conversation during this interview was a lot more free flowing. And so I thought that interview went really well, right? This firm ended up giving me an offer. So I decided to move on from my first firm now into my second investment bank. My second investment bank, I was an analyst there, and this firm was more focused in real estate advisory, but also on the side did a little bit of just other investment banking work, right? And I think the biggest thing that happened here was I was focused into a niche. My second firm was essentially focused in real estate development, and the way it is in Toronto, at least, there's probably 10 prominent firms that fund equity in real estate development projects specifically, right? Only so many analysts in this specialization, right? Probably about a year and a half to 2 years into working at my, real estate focused investment firm, this is when I thought back to my roots, right? Why did I wanted to do finance in the first place? Is because I wanted to run a portfolio at this time and run investments, right? I decided that I should make a move to private equity. Now, at this time, again, because I had experience, it was a lot easier to pick up job opportunities. Now, my recruitment to private equity at this time was still pretty unstructured, in a sense that some of the bigger real estate focused funds in Canada are more like pension funds, and those firms don't focus on development specifically. They kind of just focus on the more long-term strategies like buy and hold real estate. So the industry for real estate development specifically are still mostly boutique, smaller firms, right? And they never really recruited on cycle either. At this time, there were definitely recruiters who are focused in real estate development, and some of them also just posted job postings on the job boards. So I was reached out by a couple of recruiters, and I ended up interviewing at one of the few firms that do private equity, specifically in real estate development. Now, when I interviewed for that firm, I thought the interview generally went pretty well for the first 2 rounds. And then I was ghosted probably for a month or two. At this point, I kind of thought they just weren't interested in hiring me, but I still ended up reaching out to them as a follow-up email, right? Just asking how their search is going. One of the VPs who interviewed me at the time got back to me saying, oh yeah, they were still considering candidates, and it's down to 2 people. It was down to me and another person. The other person at this time was from a more prominent and established bank, but didn't have real estate development experience. And I was from a smaller bank, but I had real estate, development specific experience, right? After a week, they got back to me and they decided to hire me instead. And the reason he told me at the end was because they prefer somebody to start right away with real estate development specific experience. And that's why they chose me over the other candidate. And so that's the story of how I broke into private equity and investment banking. I think if I had to summarize my career so far to this date, definitely taking a first step in the industry is important. In my mind, I think it's probably 90% luck. When I say luck, I think I mean just take as many shots as possible, and hopefully one of these people out there will give you an opportunity, right? And my second biggest takeaway was probably just focusing on a niche. The fact that I was in real estate development specifically, it really propelled me from the sell side to the buy side. It could be a good or bad thing because now I'm kind of locked into this specific field, but at the same time, it opens you up for these jobs that other people would not specifically get, right? Anyways, that was my experience. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments and I'll reply to you guys. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.